Hi, my name is Luke Martin. I'm doing my project on the position of the athletic director. And I would specifically during this presentation, I would like to talk about how the role has evolved throughout the years and the increasing importance of athletic directors, because it is a role that is evolving and becoming more important every single day. So during this, I'm kind of going to talk about what does an athletic director do, what are some good things, what are some bad things, a little bit of history, things like that. But before I get into that, what is an athletic director? So I think it's important that we understand what this is. An athletic director is an administrator who oversees all aspects of the athletic programs, a school, university, or college. So that applies from the smallest schools to the biggest schools. And they truly do oversee everything. That's from scheduling to, equipment, the budget, things like that, which we'll get into later. Athletic directors can be found in middle schools throughout colleges and universities. So basically any school that has a sports team is also going to have an athletic director. So they are a very crucial part of any institution. One big reason is due to the amount of revenue that is brought in by sports, especially at these bigger schools like Clemson, Carolina. Sports is a huge source of revenue for these schools, and it's absolutely necessary for the schools to run. So, and a good athletic director to make sure that everything is running smoothly is extremely necessary. Unfortunately, athletic directors often have a stereotype of being an unimportant position. This came from, these smaller schools will kind of delegate this position to, head coaches, teachers, things like that. And they don't really take it seriously, but it is an extremely important position, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So a little bit of history on the position. The position has been around ever since schools and sports were merged. So ever since colleges, or any school for a matter of fact, brought in sports, they've implemented the position of an athletic director. The first female athletic director was Carrie Groth in 1914, and she was the athletic director at Southern Illinois University, which led to today 21.8, almost 22% of all athletic directors in the United States are women. So that is a good step in the right direction. The average age of an athletic director is 47, which I think it's important to take into account if you're someone coming right out of college trying to get a position. It is a position typically given to someone who's a little bit older with a little bit more experience. The highest paid athletic director in history is Chris Del Conte, whose salary was $2.4 million at the University of Texas. So we're obviously talking about, an elite salary, like a top guy. Obviously not everyone's going to be making that. It's widely considered to be one of the fastest evolving positions in sports. So I'm going to kind of get into why that is. But that is good news that it is changing. So what does an athletic director do? So as I stated earlier, they oversee everything in the athletic department. So they do a ton. They hire, supervise, and fire coaching staff. So, if a position opens up and this team needs a new football coach, new baseball coach, the athletic director is going to be the one interviewing them and making the ultimate decision. They have to ensure that schools remain in compliance with all athletic rules and regulations. So this could apply to, conference regulations, school regulations. They have to know all of these regulations and make sure that their school is not committing any infractions in those. One big thing they do is they prepare a budget and set aside resources for things like team travel, new equipment, salaries for coaches, and facility upkeep. So if the football team needs new helmets, they have to set aside that money for that. If the baseball team needs new baseballs, new bats, they have to set aside money for that. And they also have to constantly be talking to coaches about travel and make sure that they're not scheduling 2 games on the same day. And let's say, the softball team has an away game and the football team has an away game. They have to make sure that they have enough buses available, things like that. Tying into my next point, they have to work with coaches to plan athletic travel. So they're constantly talking to coaches, figuring out their schedules so that they can make sure that all the teams are where they need to be and that they can be on their games on time. One thing they have to do is they have to mediate disputes between coaches and athletes. So if an athlete has a problem with a coach, that athlete can come to the athletic director and speak his mind and kind of raise concern of that. And the athletic director can kind of guide him into the next steps of what to do and kind of give him some advice. Same thing vice versa with the coaches. If the coaches are having, continuous problem with the athlete they can go to the athletic director and see, maybe what they need to do without, make sure they stay in regulation. They also have to collaborate with conferences and leagues about scheduling issues. So they not only have to schedule things within the school, they also have to schedule things with the conferences. So athletic directors are constantly on the phone with other schools scheduling games for all the sports. Constantly talking to the conferences, making sure that everything's aligned. They have to ensure that all players are eligible. So if, let's say, you're an athletic director and you have a player transfer in, you have to make sure that all his credits transfer, that he's eligible for the upcoming season, or else, the team could be punished, be forced to forfeit some games, things like that. So that is very important that you make sure all the players on the field are eligible. So my prior slide was kind of the traditional roles of an athletic director, but as I said earlier, the position of athletic director is evolving. So these are some of the kind of new roles that athletic directors have to take on, just because we do live in a different world than we used to, and it is changing. So one thing is they have to prioritize mental health of athletes. As we know, the younger generation kind of has some mental health issues more so than the older generation. So I think that is a new task that athletic directors have to take on to make sure that all their athletes are healthy mentally. They also have to interact with donors and boosters, so via email or text. While, let's say, back in the day, you could kind of you maybe knew their names, you could talk to them in person, things like that. You are going to have to use things like email and text, be able to talk to all the boosters and donors and make sure that, their payments are received, everything's going good. So they also have to establish culture and show leadership to student athletes. They're going to be a big name in the school. Everyone's going to know who they are. They really have to set a good example for their athletes and kind of set the tone. They must be familiar with league guidelines to ensure no infractions are made. So I kind of touched on this earlier, but I think it's important to revisit it because I cannot stress enough how many guidelines and regulations there are, from Title IX to things like that. It's important that you kind of are up to date with all of them and make sure that your school's following all of them. You also have to be able to make quick decisions in a pandemic that will have a long-lasting effect. A great example of this is COVID-19. So a lot of athletic directors had to kind of decide on the spot, are we going to cancel our season? Are we going to send our players home? Are we going to send our students home? Things like that. So you do have to be able to make quick decisions like that. You also have to make sure your school is in regulation with modern-day gender and sport regulations. So this isn't a very common one, but let's say you have a transgender coming, you have to make sure that everything is aligned with them to see what league and what teams they're allowed to play for, things like that. You have to ensure that all sports and genders are treated equally according to Title IX. So, the football team can't get a whole new field, get new helmets without the softball team getting things too. The money has to be dispersed equally, things like that. You have to, it's important to make sure that all genders are treated equally. So what are some good skills or qualities for an athletic director? So for one, a good skill would to be supportive of our coaching athletes. So, say they lose a big game, you're going to want to be able to be supportive of them and lift them up. You're going to want to be understanding of all situations. Let's say, a coach or a player has a death in the family. You're going to want to be able to be understanding with that, sympathize with that, and help them get through that. You must have a key attention to detail. Everything I touched on earlier, you have to do a lot of scheduling, a lot of stuff with, finance. You really have to have a attention to detail with that. You must be able to be flexible and perform under all situations. COVID was a good example of this, coming back to it. A lot of these athletic directors were not used to these situations, having to make decisions like this, but ultimately they had to be able to perform under unusual situations. You have to be a good public speaker with the ability to remain calm under scrutiny. So, let's say you're an athletic director at a bigger school, like Clemson, North Carolina, and there's a scandal. You're going to be constantly bombarded by the press. You're going to have to answer questions. They're going to be criticizing you. You're going to have to give them answers. What are you going to do? Who's going to be punished? Who's responsible? Things like that. So you're going to have to be able to remain calm under that. You have to be open to suggestions and criticism. So, let's say someone comes to you and says, I think that you could do this better. I think you could do this better. I think that we could improve, this by implementing this. You're going to have to be open to that and be willing to, try new things out. And you're obviously going to have to be honest and have integrity. You can't be going around doing things that are going to make the school look bad upon, because you are going to have to set a good example. So how do you become an athletic director, and what are some requirements? So in the past, education for this position has been overlooked, as I touched on earlier, regarding the stereotypes. A postgraduate education has become essential for bigger schools or universities. So with schools like Clemson or Carolina, you're going to absolutely need postgraduate education. A bachelor's degree is not going to suffice. A bachelor's degree will suffice in scenario if, say you want to be an athletic director for a middle school or a high school, a bachelor's degree will be fine for that, but prior experience in sports management is highly preferred, especially in bigger schools. So let's say you want to go become the athletic director at Clemson. You're going to want to have some experience, whether that's being an athletic director at a smaller school or another form of sports management, or just kind of any management in general. Some other things that are looked on pretty good is prior coaching experience. People interviewing you or people hiring you would really like to see that you have coached before and that you know what these coaches go through day to day, because you'll be able to help them better in the long run. The same thing goes for prior participation in collegiate sports. This is a big deal because you know the things that the students are going to have to go through trying to balance school, sports, family life, social life, things like that. A good kind of first step is an internship. They're a good resume highlight, and that will ultimately help you in the hiring process and show that you were eager from a young age, and that is something that you wanted to do. So how competitive is it to find a job as an athletic director? So there's typically only one athletic director per school. Some of these bigger schools, their athletic directors will have assistants that kind of handle day-to-day things, maybe small, tedious things that the big athletic directors don't have any time for. So there's only 1,100 athletic directors in the NCAA across all three divisions, and that is just including college. But there's roughly nationwide 5,600 athletic directors. One thing is, once these people secure these positions, they typically stay in them for a pretty long time and kind of make a pretty long career out of them. So it's pretty rare to see a job open up for an athletic director. And so, as I touched on earlier, an option is starting off in entry-level jobs such as coaching or teaching at a school you would like to become an athletic director at. So you can get whatever degrees you need, become a student or teacher, and once position open up, you'll have a really good chance of getting hired as the athletic director. So let's say you decide you do want to become an athletic director. What are some benefits of becoming an athletic director? For one, you get to have a career in sports. I'm assuming if you want to become an athletic director, it's because you have a passion for sports and you want to be around it. So that is one bonus. You are able to help develop the youth and make an impact. So if something helping young people, develop is something you want to do, being an athletic director is a great job for that. Along with that, you get the opportunity to mentor people who may be going through difficult times. As I touched on earlier, let's say you have a player who had a death in the family, you'll be then put in a position where you can mentor them and help them get through that and teach them how to get through difficult times. One benefit is one of the higher paying jobs in education. The median salary is $62,000. Obviously, I gave an example of a very, very high salary earlier. The median salary is $62,000. At some smaller schools, you're not going to be making that much. You'll probably make around half of that. But there are opportunities for promotions and raises based on performance. So if you really, come in and you kind of renovate the program and you improve it, you could get pay raises, you get promotions, things like that. And one good thing is the field is expected to grow 10% over the next 8 years, which is a lot. So that is good news. So obviously, just like any job with positive, there are also negatives. So some negatives is it can be demanding and require long hours. That is just because of all the things that you're in charge of and you're tasked to do, with scheduling, things like that. Smaller schools have low salaries. It's not going to be a super high paying job, at a small middle school, small high school, just as a teacher it might not be. And at these smaller schools, you're going to spend a lot of time on a computer, on the phone. So if you're someone who, kind of wants to be out in the field, You might want to steer more towards like coaching. Athletic directors are going to constantly be on the phone, calling the conference officials, calling coaches, scheduling things. Another negative is minor mistakes can have serious consequences. So let's say you make a minor mistake like not setting enough size for football helmets. Well, then the football team can't have them. They can't play that year. Let's say you schedule 2 home games on the same day on the same field. One of those games has to get canceled for what, in the grand scheme of things is a minor mistake. Reduced school funding is another negative. Schools don't have as much money as they used to, and they're not getting funding from the government as much as they used to. So you're not going to have as much money to put towards things. You're really going to have to keep a tight budget. Many athletic directors are also coaches or teachers. So, especially at smaller schools, if you're an athletic director, you're most likely, you're also the head football coach. You're also, you teach a history class, whatever you majored in college if you didn't major in sports management. So something I thought would be interesting to do is I actually interviewed an athletic director, and he was my athletic director and my head coach for my high school baseball and football team, and he coached me all 4 years throughout high school. So I got to know him pretty well, so I thought he would be a good person to interview. And I just kind of asked him some questions that I had, and so for example, I said, what is your favorite part of being an athletic director? He said, my favorite part is I get to be around sports every day. I loved sports ever since I was little, so being able to make a career out of it is pretty cool. As I touched on earlier, if you want to become an athletic director, there's a very good chance that you want to get it due to sports and you have a passion for it. So that is a good example. I said, what is your least favorite part of being an athletic director? He said his least favorite part is scheduling for several sports at a time can sometimes be stressful, but you learn how to do it the longer you're on the job. And he said the pay could be better too. So, his biggest criticism was the scheduling can be kind of stressful, constantly calling, all these different schools, scheduling these games, and the pay, which we touched on earlier. I said, what is your biggest piece of advice to someone wanting to become an athletic director after college? He said, find a good school system to work in and people you enjoy working with. If you enjoy who you're with, it will only make your job easier over time. Also pay attention to the little things because they matter more than you think. So I kind of think he hit the nail on the head with what I spoke about earlier, talking about really focus on the little things and having a good key attention to detail. And he also noted that you should really try to find a school system with people you like because it's going to make your job easier because nobody wants to work around people that they don't like, especially in a pretty high stress job. So just kind of like a wrap up or a conclusion, becoming an athletic director is a very rewarding job. It kind of has some pros, some downfalls. It's something to consider when looking at this job and kind of see if you're the right fit for it. It is an evolving position, and it's already changed drastically throughout the years, and it's only going to change more. So that is something to consider. And a very specific kind of person is right for this job. Not everybody's going to be right. Not everyone's going to enjoy it. So I think it's important to someone who wants to become an athletic director to kind of look at themselves and weigh out their options and see if they would be a good fit for the job. So that's my presentation on the athletic director, and that's my works cited.